Hello and welcome to a new episode of Beyond the Code hosted by Notchup.com. Today I'm joined by Hywel, founder and CEO of skillaway.com, a platform for tech leaders to train up their technical teams. Today we're going to talk a lot about skills-based organization. Why do organizations need to build a skills? Why do organizations need to be skills based? What do they look for when they are building, or what are the strategies they need to account for when they're building a skills based organization? What do you look for when you hire people for that? Uh, what are some of the anecdotes around the same? And a lot of other interesting thoughts around generally about upskilling your technical team. So let's welcome Yuval. Hey, Hywel, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Malik. I'm very good, thank you, and I'm very glad to be here.
Cool, thank you. And if I'm just before we begin, did I say your name right?
I go with Howell actually, so
Havel,
it's
yes.
Howell. Yeah,
Yes, sorry for that. And I know you did ask me about my name. I'm very used to getting my name wrong, and it's all right. There was a time where I will be like not bothered with my name at all, as long as I know somebody is talking to me. I'm okay with that.
yeah, exactly. Well, my name is Welsh, so there are very few people who know how to pronounce it correctly. You can probably tell from my accent that I am not Welsh. I'm English, and I'm told by Welsh people that even I say my own name wrong. So I don't feel I can hold other people to a high standard when I'm not saying my name right myself.
Right. I mean, it's weird. When your name, I found this myself. My name is like not the same name as the most common name, but very similar to it. And then people will just assume and say Malik, all the time.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, yeah.
but then over a period of time, I'm like, I'm not really bothered with what they call me.
As
So
long as
never
you know
mind.
they're talking to you, it's the main thing, right? As long as you know
Yes,
you're being spoken to.
exactly, exactly. So never mind. It was interesting to have heard your one of your presentation recently. We were in that event. You were talking about this whole skills-based hiring mode and the organization, and I thought it would be interesting for us to do a podcast together. And thanks for making time for that. So we'll get into that deeper. But before we go there, why don't you tell us about your background and how did you ended up doing your current startup?
Yeah. So I think my background probably starts by saying that I really like learning. Like I'm always someone I did quite well in school, learning wise. I'm always someone whose hobbies have involved lots of learning. And so I've just always been very passionate about learning and I care a lot about learning and I just enjoy the process of learning. Before starting Skillaware, which is my company, where I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders, I was a CTO leading scale-up startups for 10 or so years. So I was often the founder. If not the founder, I'd be advising the in-place CTO about growing the company, growing the tech organization, how early stage companies should find customers and things like that. And I kept feeling that learning should be more of an answer than it was. I was often in situations where I wanted my team to be maybe more full stack so that they would have fewer handoffs and they'd be able to deliver software faster, or maybe just stronger in the technologies we used to take more load off our more senior experienced developers. I remember one team I worked with where they had a team of data scientists and a Python developer, and the ratio was something like 6 data scientists to one Python developer whose job was to productionize everything the data scientists came up with. And through no fault of their own, this person was a bottleneck for the team. And it felt so obvious that if we could just make all the data scientists write slightly high quality Python, this person would have less work to do. And without having to hire any new people, the team would be able to ship stuff faster. And my realization was that all of the learning that we have access to, all of the training, is really well optimized for information. It's very well optimized for giving people new data, new knowledge, new facts, but not for skill. And these are really different things. that we should approach in a different way. And I was lucky enough to be a student at Cambridge University. Cambridge does lectures. Lectures are an excellent way of giving people knowledge. So are podcasts, by the way. Whereas what Cambridge does really well as your lecture, you then go away, try and solve problems that relate to what you learned in the lecture. And then you sit down with a master's student, someone who's a bit further ahead in their studies than you, a master's student or even a professor sometimes. And their job is to go through the problems you got wrong and work out why you got them wrong and correct your understanding. And for me, that was where all of the learning of my degree actually happened. It's not when you hear the information, it's when you try and apply it. It's when you try and turn it into the skill and you get stuck. Getting unstuck is how we actually learn to do stuff better. And so with Skill Aware, we took that approach and said, how do we scale this? How do we make this available for tech teams? How do we make people more productive, write better code, ship their product roadmap faster? And essentially the model was we take that form of learning and make it readily available to companies that need it and want it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I have got so many questions based on what you talked about. But we'll start with a few things, right? So I get the idea of your delivery teams or engineering team to be more skills based, and but I have a notion that at times the technical skills can be learned. The person that you hire, let's say you hire a junior developer, if he's got the right attitude and motivation to learn, then he can always learn new things, always pick up new frameworks and new ways of doing things and stuff. But often what I find that some people or some developers that are hired, they were very good in what they do, but they don't want to do something else because they think that is going to degrade their skills, their existing knowledge about their framework, right? So let's say, even random example, I hired somebody who was very good in Java programming, and then when Java was shifting away to more of a JavaScript-based like Node.js programming, right? Then in the beginning they were quite hesitant to try it and say, hey, if you go on to Node, then we'll lose our edge on the Java, right? And so on. What's your opinion around that?
My opinion. So I think I've yet to meet someone who doesn't want to learn. Lots of people don't want to be trained, but everyone I've met wants to learn, but we are picky about the things we want to learn. So I consider myself a polyglot technologist, like I've worked in a load of different programming languages. But if you said part of your job now is you have to learn Fortran, or part of your job now is you have to learn COBOL, my God, like absolutely not. So I have that reluctance and that resistance. I guess I think that a big part of this is what people's expectations are for their jobs. Because when you take a job, right, you have a job description which says, here is part of the role. If that person's role is you're going to be a Java programmer and Java is the only thing that you're going to learn, I think they have taken that with a reasonable expectation that they are going to learn and get better at Java, but not have to learn other languages they don't like so much. And so I feel a bit like that person is not me, but I have sympathy for them if that is how they want their career to go. On the other hand, if they've been hired as a developer specializing in Java, but along the way we're going to want you to be good at other languages too, or if they've been told we're making all of our roles into full stack roles and now you need to write front end code in JavaScript or TypeScript, then I think, well, they either are part of that new team and therefore need to learn JavaScript as well, and they should, I would say, embrace it in that scenario, or they're not going to be part of that team, and we have to find somewhere else, either a different team in the same org or a different company for them to work in, where they can go and be a full Java developer and nothing else.
Yeah. So, when it comes to hiring, normally I also believe that normally you should be able to pick up more things, especially when you're working in tech, the frameworks, they come and go, there's a particular framework very popular now, will not be popular in a few years' time, and something else will come up. That's just the nature of tech development, right? So I normally feel that people should be, looking forward to picking up new things. Of course, they can't pick up every single thing that comes their way, right? Um, and then I heard this notion of, hiring people with T skills, right? So they may be very good with one or two, frameworks or domains, but then they have enough of the range across multiple frameworks or multiple domains. And I interpreted that these skills as like really the fundamentals, right? So I do it like university. So you need to know like a really solid fundamentals across a lot of different concepts, and maybe one or two concepts you need to know really well, very good, high experience in that. So when I interview for technical roles, I normally look into their analytical skills, their problem solving skills, the way they approach their problems, how they construct the whole logic when they are, that they could convert into programming. I rarely check their programming skills per se. You know, do you think I can change my approach, or do you think I'm heading in the right direction there?
I have lots of thoughts about that. So, I guess firstly, I want to say that when we talk about picking up a new framework, I would draw a line between picking up a new thing so that you can write some code in it and actually being good at it. Um,
Mm,
Generally speaking, when we employ people, we want them to be good at it. I think React is a great example of this, like picking up the basics of React.js. So picking up enough React.js to be dangerous is super easy. What we have found is like actually grokking how, like understanding deeply how React.js works and its model for declaring what should be on the page and how you can interact with that in an imperative way sometimes when you need to, and how to understand when it's going to do what it's going to do so that you fundamentally it works in the way that you expect and it doesn't subvert your expectations all the time. That is a level beyond what a lot of people get when they just try and pick it up for themselves. And my experience suggests that this is true in most frameworks and in most technologies, is there is an amount people can learn to get by, but that is not the same in as learning to get good. And generally speaking, we want people to get good. The thing about T-shaped people, this idea that we want people who have a kind of shallow level of ability in lots of things, like there's a sort of shallow but broad part of the T, and then there's one bit where they go very deep. For me, I think that's less about being confident that they're going to be able to learn other things or necessarily become full stack, but more it gives me confidence that they can communicate with other people effectively. People who have a very sort of people who only have shallow knowledge in everything and don't have an area where they're very deep, I feel nervous about giving that person something that for them to own themselves. Because when someone is really owning something, I want them to be super good at it, and I want the people around them to be kind of supporting players. I want them on their own to be able to finish something end to end. On the other hand, people who only have that depth without the breadth, I worry about their ability to interact with other folks in the team. So to pick an example from my own experience, I've written mobile apps, but I'm very much not a mobile app developer. So I would say I have shallow knowledge about how Android and iOS apps work. I can probably communicate with a developer, like I know what an
mm.
activity is or a view is in one of those ecosystems, but I'm not the right person to be the senior developer on a mobile app project. So for me, I see that the benefits of that T as being more like having confidence that someone is going to sit really well in the team and have a good and be able to carve out a role for themselves in among all the other people. And then in terms of looking for those things in hiring, I tend not to look too hard at technical skills in hiring, and I look more for the kind of transferable skills and attitudes and things like that. I think technical skills are important, but what we found is that we can we can provide the learning to like get people very good at something relatively quickly. And in fact, we worked with some companies that were in hyperscale, simply couldn't find enough developers to hire for the roles that they needed in the technologies that they needed them in. And so they used us to completely lower the bar on the technical hiring standard, they looked much more for the more kind of transferable communication, teamwork type skills and attitudes and behaviors. And then we were part of their onboarding process to make people good at the stack that they were using.
Cool. Now, again, that I again suddenly have too many thoughts in my mind. But let's speak one by one, right? And I was almost going to put like a cheeky promotion about Notchup, that hey, if you couldn't hire, you could have always come to us. But never mind. Um, talking of this whole skills-based hiring, right? Um, there certainly has been trend recently about building a skills-based organization, right? For companies to really understand what are the skills they currently have and which direction they need to go. For them to hire people by understanding their actual skills level, both hard technical skills and soft skills, and then figuring out, okay, which of these skills will be relevant for them as they go into their next phase of growth, right? And not really look into their, educational background or prior work histories and all, because you may have worked at some really big brand names, possibly a FANG company, but frankly, you may not be very good versus somebody who may not have worked at a FANG company, but could be very solid when it comes to the actual transferable skills. What are your like again you work with some of these organizations, right, in for them to be more skills based, what are your top, let's say, 2 3 tips that you would like to give to a possible company, a scale up, which want to be in that mode, where they are hiring people really to support their growth mode. They have now the right attitudes to support that growth journey with a lot of variability in what will happen in next 6 12 months. What would you say to them?
Good question. So, firstly, I would distinguish knowledge from skills. This is a really
Hmm.
important thing. Knowledge is super easily gained. We can Google for knowledge. I will give you an example. I was talking with a CTO some years ago, CTO of a fintech company, and this person had got to the stage where some of his reports were leading interviews without him there, and they were turning away hires. And the reason they were turning them away were because they would give these people questions like, okay, there's an amount of money A in this account, amount of money B in this account. We need to add them together to find the total. And these people they were interviewing were adding them as decimals, as like floating point integers, whereas
Hmm.
all of the people who work in fintech know that we have to convert that into a kind of decimal based object first. So we should convert it into something that understands that there are kind of two decimal places of money, or takes a like pound amount and pence amount, and then add them. And the CTO was complaining, saying like, I am losing good hires because my team are evaluating them as if they're already in the door. And I know that if we got a good developer in on the first day, I can say, right, when we deal with money amounts, we don't treat them as floating point numbers. We turn them into decimals first, or we turn them into an integer number of pence first. That to me is a classic example of people treating knowledge as skills. Like, it's a bit of information that if you know it, that's fine. You can start using that in your excuse me, in your work. If you set that up as a bar to people being hired, that is just an artificial and unnecessary bar to perfectly good people, because it's just knowledge. It's not about skill or ability. I think the next thing I would say is to, and you touched on this already, to distinguish skills from experience. Because even if people not just have been at a very well-known, successful company, but have been really great there, that doesn't mean that they will be great with your company. And that is because in different companies, there are often very different expectations about how broad the work is that you're going to have to do. Um, there are different expectations about the kind of quality bar. So if you do work for a FANG and you're like one of the big tech companies, and whenever you release code, it's going to immediately go to 10 million people, you are having to think in a very different way to if you are working at a company where your code goes to 100 customers. And not everyone will make that switch correctly. Both the 100 customer people won't be able to just switch to the 10 million customer use case and change their thinking, and vice versa. which can mean that you get really inappropriate approaches for the different contexts. And so I think we should leave experience behind as a measure. Um, I, I'm not going to make the case that like measuring by experience is equivalent to ageism, but it does feel like there's an aspect of age-related discrimination that someone could claim there. If you said, I require 5 years of working experience in this technology, and some incredibly bright developer who had worked very hard and had picked things up really quickly, had learned really well from their peers, but had only been working for 3 years, was disqualified from that job, essentially because their age meant that they couldn't have worked for 5 years. Part of me feels like that person was hard done by, because I think they potentially were good enough for the role, but because they weren't old enough to have met your experience requirement, they wouldn't even be considered. All of which is to say that I don't think experience is a good proxy for ability. We use it for one. We use it as one because, honestly, because it's easy, because we can just pick the numbers out of the CV, and it gives us a very quick way of cutting a pile of 100 CVs down to 50, but not because it is actually a good measure of ability. And I guess that leads to my third point, which is, how do you measure ability? If you need to measure those things, you have to actually get people to do them. There is no way to prove an ability without doing the things. Certification is absolutely not a proof of ability. Experience is not a proof of ability. Whereas if you want people to be good at a particular software programming language, then get them to do something in that programming language. It doesn't have to be in the interview. It could be something that you give them as a homework task. We used to have one in my old company where we had a broken application. We told people it was broken. I think we told them that there were 3 bugs, and there were actually 4. We only ever treated the 4th one as a bonus if people found that and fixed it. And they had to go and find the 3 bugs and fix them, and then we'd look at their code and talk about it with them. The conversation that happened around it is much more about making sure that it was really them that solved the problem and they understand what they've done. But the key thing is really, part of their job is going to be fixing bugs in this framework. Can they fix bugs in this framework? That was such a core part. It feels so obvious that we should set that as a problem for people, and yet most people would just say, well, have you got 4 years in this framework on your CV?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. I definitely agree with you. I personally don't really like to evaluate people based on the number of years of experience. And for myself, when I was early in my career, I was generally very fast at picking up things. And, I would feel discriminated when somebody say, oh, yeah, but you don't have 10 years of experience and so on. But I'm like, look, but I know I have done it. I know how to get it done, and I have done it. Here it is. Here is the proof. But then they'll say, "Oh yeah, but based on your prior salary, this is the salary we'll give you." I'm like, "Yeah, but that's not fair." You know. Uh,
Well, it isn't.
so
I mean, you're quite right. I I'm not. I feel like I don't want to derail us, but by getting into a conversation about how we calculate salary.
yeah,
But the people who are calculating salary based on how much you used to earn, what
hmm,
that tells me as a potential employee is you don't know what I'm worth. If you
yeah,
are judging by what I was paid before, all that tells me is you don't really know how to evaluate me and my salary and my value. It
yeah,
is it is again, it is like a lazy proxy where really what we want excuse me, it is a lazy way to evaluate salary, where really what we want is people who can say, well, you are working at the level that is worth this to the company. Like for us, the range we have for people who are senior in this technology is from X to Y. Uh, I have seen that the work you're capable of feels like roughly here in that range, so your pay is going to be this.
yeah.
That feels like such a reasonable expectation to me, and I find it frustrating that people would just ask what you were paid before, because
Yeah.
the person
I'm
who
gonna
hired you
touch.
there probably asked the same question. So this is an anecdote which again is not true, and it exists in many forms. So the version I'm going to tell is about the physicist Max Planck.
Mm.
And it's the most famous form. Max Planck was one of the people involved in helping us understand the kind of internals of an atom. If you look up the Planck length, that is named
Mm.
after him. And Max Planck was doing a big tour of the US, and he was giving lectures at universities. This was, back in the 30s or 40s. He was going around giving lectures at all of the universities, and he had this one driver, his chauffeur, for the whole tour, who took him on this big, long winding route around every city in the United States. And every time Max gave the talk, he would his chauffeur would come in and would sit at the back of the auditorium and would listen to the whole talk. He would listen to the questions that the people in the audience asked afterwards, and he would kind of pay attention, and he would chat with Max as they were driving. He would ask questions about the theory and really get into it, and he was keen to learn and to understand. They got to the very last stop in the tour. I guess this would have been down in the Southwest, somewhere in California, probably. And they were sort of joking with each other in the car because they'd formed quite a good friendship by this point. And Max said, "You've been in every lecture I've given, and you've had all of the questions. And I've noticed in the car that you do quite a good impression of me. No one in this university knows who I am, and I'm quite tired. It would be really funny if you gave the lecture today and pretended to be me, and then I can just rest in the back of the auditorium and watch." And they joked about it, but then they actually did it. So the chauffeur stood at the front of the hall, said, "Hello, I'm Max Planck. Here's what I'm going to talk to you about today." He delivered the lecture in the style of Max Planck, and then he got to the end, and lots of people asked questions, and he answered every single one of the questions perfectly. And then a very serious-looking professor got up from the front row, and he asked a question, and it was a question that had never come up in any of the other places that they'd been to on the tour. And Max Planck paused for a second and looked down, and then he looked up and met the professor's eye, and he said, "That question is so stupid and so obvious that even my chauffeur could answer it." And he pointed to the back of the room, to the real Max Planck, who then stood up and answered the question. Now, for me, what this story illustrates is partly like our expectations about what chauffeurs are capable of, and that they can know a lot more than we expect. And in fact, anyone who's familiar with the knowledge that the London taxi drivers have to learn should have very high expectations of what drivers are capable of. But also, it illustrates the difference between knowing things and being able to do them, and knowing things and having wisdom. Because the chauffeur was able to go around the entire tour and essentially learn everything that Max Planck said in response to the questions and the content of the talk. He was able to deliver that knowledge verbatim just by sitting there and absorbing it every time. But when it comes to the difficult questions, when it comes to the things that are slightly different to what he's seen before, he still has to refer back to the real Max Planck at the back of the room.
Yeah. So, this is similar to the Big Bang Theory. I think one of the episodes where Sheldon is participating, and there was this, I can't remember, like a cleaner or somebody basically answers the question and he does not believe him, but the answer happens to be true. I'm not sure if you saw that episode ever or not.
I never watched it, but this story is quite well known, and I could well
Yeah.
believe it would be the basis of an episode of a TV program.
Yeah, so it's similar where Sheldon is like, they're competing in a some quiz and stuff. He's winning, but there's one question he's not able to answer that he's thinking really hard. And then one of the cleaners said, "Hey, this is the answer." And he believed, "Yeah, you are a cleaner. What do you know? That's not the answer." But that answer actually is true. And then he asked him, like, "How did you know this answer?" He's like, "Look, I was like, a senior scientist in some Russian army or something. But now I'm living like a refugee or something in the US, right? Whatever, right? So that's the story behind that. All right, let's move on to something else, right? So where's your firm heading? Tell us more about your company, Skiller Whale.
Yeah, so I guess we are finding that we are doing more and more in learning for tech teams. So we started out doing very specifically things in hard technical skills. So we worked with teams that had JavaScript developers and React developers and Python developers and whatever technology. And our job was to go in and just make them better, work out exactly what each person didn't know already, so that we didn't waste any of their time on telling them stuff that they already knew,
Mm,
and then just like always be working at the edge of what they need to increase their abilities to make them better at the tech they were already using. And then over time, that has evolved so that now, as well as doing hard technical skills, we also work in slightly more abstract skills. So we work with companies on things like API design, and to help people get better at designing and building APIs and API first organizations. And we also now are doing more on things like test driven development and effective pair programming. And then most recently, our latest curriculum launch has been in skills for managers and leaders. So this is about 6 months old now, and we've been working with, often it's newer team leads or engineering managers, and the kind of interpersonal and leadership and management skills you need to succeed at those positions. We've taken our existing model for learning, which is very focused on only working on gaps and the gaps that matter, and then having all the learning be learning by doing, with a real practitioner whose job is to give you feedback and add context and bring the nuance of the situation to, so that you can really apply it. And we now are working with companies where we'll work with developers in every stack and with some of their managers and leaders, and with some of those kind of cross-cutting concerns like API design. And where we're going is really more of the same. Like, ultimately, we don't want to stop with what we're doing now, but I think it'll be a while before we move out of tech teams. We are always adding new curricula, and we're always starting to work with new companies. And I think what we find is that once companies start, they don't want to stop. Um, we actually just published a case study with Pleo a couple of months ago. So Pleo, the Danish expense management, I call them
mm,
a soonicorn. They're not a unicorn, $1 billion valuation
mm,
yet, but I think they will be soon. And they were hitting productivity bottlenecks because they had a monolith. Teams had to chat to each other before they could release code to understand what each team was doing. They wanted to become API first. After working with us, they saw productivity improve by 40% across their 200-person team. And now we're working on them with a load of other topics as well, around management and leadership. And I think we're working with React Native teams. Um, Generally speaking, we see our job as to go in and find out what hires people would be making, or what skill gaps are in the way of tech leaders achieving their strategies. And we come in to help with those skill gaps so that people either don't have to hire, or so that they can hire and be more flexible about who they hire, or so that they can just take their existing people and make them more skilled while also hiring.
all right. Look, I'm just mindful of your time. You mentioned about you need to head on the tube.
I do.
So why don't we wrap up? And I think we probably should book one more podcast given the amount of topics that we have been talking about. But that's for another day. Let's just wrap today's chat. And but before we end, there are a few questions that we normally ask everybody who comes
Mm.
on this podcast, right? They're generic, they're not technical. So would be good to know your thoughts about them. So if you're ready, I can start.
Yeah, go for it. I'll try.
Yeah, cool. So the first one, right? Who is one person alive or dead that you want to meet?
Oh, that I want to meet. Um, Gosh, I don't know actually. I think I worry about picking someone who I really admire, and then like, what if they didn't? If they weren't all that they were cracked up to be? Um,
You never know.
you know what? I'm going to pick someone who's just really funny. So I think Andy Samberg from The Lonely Island, who was on SNL back,
Yes.
10 years ago, I think seems like just a really funny person. And I feel like whatever I brought to the conversation, I would have an amazing time just hanging out with him. So I'm going to say Andy Samberg as my one person to meet.
Okay, cool. And who is one person, again, alive or dead, that you were most inspired by in your life?
Oh, that I was most inspired by. Um, this is going to sound so lame, but I am very lucky. I find my parents genuinely quite inspirational in terms of their dedication to hard work, their belief that essentially that you can, if you want to do the thing and know the thing, you can learn it if you put in enough effort. And that has definitely shaped how I see the world, and has always been really I don't know, inspirational to me. They don't
Yeah.
know that, but I don't think they're going to listen to this podcast, so it won't go to their heads. We should be
You
okay.
never know. You never know. Um, all right. And last one. Who do you think we should bring as a guest on this podcast?
Who should we bring as a guest on this podcast? Um, that's a good question, and I guess I'm thinking about skills based learning. Is that the kind of the area where
Oh,
you're
no,
thinking? Is it?
it could be anything. We had a few guests say, like, bring on Elon Musk. And I said, okay, maybe one day we will be able to, if we get big enough.
Uh, I'm probably going to go in a different way with my recommendations to Mr. Musk. Um, I would say someone like DHH from Basecamp, so David Henmeyer
Oh, yeah.
Hansen, and I think uh, I I don't always agree with his opinions, but I think he gives his opinions in a really entertaining way. And I think at Basecamp they've taken a lot of bold decisions, like they've recently moved back from cloud to their own infrastructure. And I think understanding the decisions that they've made at different times in their journey would make for an interesting podcast episode.
That's interesting. Definitely. Slowly, once we have got enough, so we're still, I think we have done about 10 episodes so far on our podcast. Um, and once we have done enough, maybe about 15, 20, then I'll start trying to reach out all these guest suggestions directly and see if they would like to come or not. I
Okay.
need to build some audience before, and some sizable audience, and then I'll try to approach them and say, hey, you know what, we had your recommendation, do you want to come on? So let's
Yeah.
see. I'll try.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Thank you. So anyway, Tiwan, I think it's time that we wrap up. Just mindful of your time as well. But thanks a lot for coming onto our podcast. It was really interesting to know your opinion about building a skills-based organization, how to go about building teams, how to hire people, and strategies about upskilling the organization, as you grow. So thanks a lot for joining today.
No worries. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Nice to
Yeah,
chat.
no worries. And hopefully we'll get to do one more very soon.
Sounds good. I'm up for it.
Yes, cool. Thank you, Ewan.
All right. Bye for now.
Yeah. Bye. Let me stop.